Our next speaker is going to be Steve Burton from Icicle Technologies. Steve's the creator of the award-winning food production management system, Icicle, through the development of advanced food system technologies based on over a decade of sophisticated software development expertise. He's taken Icicle beyond document management and food safety to offer a complete solution for smart automation, improving quality standards, production efficiency, and expanding growth opportunities in all types of food businesses. So welcome, Steve.
To let you know kind of where we fit in, my background personally is actually from the software side of the world, and before that, manufacturing. So I'm not natively really a food person, which gives me a little bit of a different kind of perspective than people who came initially from the food industry. And when I look at traceability systems, I originally, as a consumer of food products, just assumed that every company probably had a fully automated, enhanced, complete traceability system just by default. And it was a bit surprising for me when I found out that that wasn't necessarily the case. And when I look at companies, there's really two types of companies when I'm thinking about traceability. Those that have ERP systems and use it effectively for their traceability. And there's also a lot of companies who don't have an ERP system or whose ERP system might not fit very well with their business. And that's because, as Steve mentioned, the ERP systems are designed to be very broad and they're very effective. But they're not always necessarily very detail kind of niche oriented towards the food companies. So the advice I give to new clients that come on board, because we have lots of clients who use our solution for all kinds of things and don't use it for traceability because they have a very effective ERP system. And if you're in that sort of category, I would say don't fix it. If it's working, fantastic. So we'll play nicely, we'll integrate, we can do traceability using your ERP. But for those who don't have it, this is a place where we play. This slide is a joke, actually, by the way, because my marketing people know I hate that picture, and they put it on every presentation. So I'm going to have to call HR when I get back. My focus, though, is going to be on the technology side, because I'm fundamentally a technologist, and that's really where I come from. It's always interesting being the second speaker, because you don't know whether or not the first speaker is going to say everything that you wanted to say. This is one part where I don't think it really... I think I can add a little bit more to that. And coming from outside the food industry, kind of what I see as the priorities in food production and traceability is almost the opposite of what's kind of perceived in the industry. So I think the highest priority kind of reason why you need to do food safety and traceability could be best illustrated really by a little bit of a story. And I gave a similar talk in Boston recently. Where it was the actual place where this occurred, which was kind of nice. But in 1912 in Boston, so we're talking about over 100 years ago now, people started showing up at doctors' offices in droves. And they complained of respiratory problems, sore throat. Nobody knew what the problem was at all. And there was no traceability system in place. So after a while, they figured out that there was something wrong with the milk. But they didn't know which place it was that the milk was coming from, because it came in unlabeled glass jars. Nobody knew where it was, where the source of this particular problem was. So what they did, the physicians all got together in Boston, and they mapped out the victims of the outbreak. And by looking at where the victims were clustered along and comparing that to the routes of the milk trucks, they actually managed to trace back to the dairy that was producing the tainted product. So I think that's a pretty good illustration of the worst possible way to do traceability, which is to rely on mapping the victims' locations. Much better to have a bit more proactive. But I think public safety is probably one of the main reasons why you want to do that. The second reason is illustrated by a more recent event that happened called a Rancho recall. That was down in Petula, California. And what happened there, it was a bit of a nefarious sort of affair where there was a rancher who had some cattle that they wanted to slaughter, and it was rejected by the USDA inspectors because the animals had cancer in the eyes. So what he did is when the inspector was out on a coffee break, he swapped the heads of those animals with ones that weren't tainted, and then those animals were processed. There were 17 animals in all that were run through that way. And once he was caught, they had to recall about, what was it? It was $20 million in claims and $27 million in losses for the industry as a whole, and 9 million pounds of beef was recalled. So this the Rancho Ranch is no longer in existence, as one could imagine. The proprietor actually spent some time in jail for that. But the second reason is to guard against financial loss. So if you have one of these issues, you need to make sure that you're protected and you narrow the recall as much as humanly possible. But a third reason, which I think is kind of more relevant or important to a lot of people in the food industry, because let's face it, a lot of us don't really think that's ever going to happen to us. And so if you talk about all the scary things that happen to people, well, it happened to them, it's not us. And it's hard to internalize that. But one of the things I've observed in the food industry is that it's a very, very competitive market. The competition is so high that the margins shrink to almost zero. And if you are left behind doing business processes manually, you're eating margin that could otherwise contribute to your bottom line. And if there is very little bottom line, it makes you less competitive than your competitors, which costs you market share. So I think you need to comply with that. And also, it's not voluntary. I mean, the fourth reason is that there's regulatory requirements. And it comes both from the regulatory agencies like the CFIA and the FDA, but also from customers like Costco, Walmart, all those big box stores are requiring that you have a GFSI certification, which requires food safety and traceability, or you, I forgot what the other thing was. Anyway, when you look at the actual implementation, though, when we go to different customers and we look at it, kind of how it's handled in food facilities, it's oftentimes the responsibility of the QA department. And QA department is really at a disadvantage to manage this. I mean, the reason that they're stuck with this is because it's primarily something that they have to defend during audits. So they have to do a mock recall, or they have to respond to a real recall. Unfortunately, hope it never happens to any of you guys. But when that happens, it's usually the QA's department. But they tend to be underappreciated and underfunded. And it's a big problem, I think, for them to have the kind of cultural weight within their organization to really have an effective traceability system. So you need to kind of come up with a different solution and get everybody more involved. And what we mean by this slide, not doing any work at all, is that if you can integrate all of the steps that's required to gather all of this traceability information into one place, then the QA people, when they have to defend the audit, it should be a one-finger exercise. You want to see a mock recall? Boom, right? And you want to see a list of customers who received this product? No problem. You want to look at the receiving record that shows where we received this ingredient? No problem. Always should be one button. If you have to use 2 fingers, or God forbid, 10 fingers in order to do the recall because you're shoveling through pieces of paper, as Steve mentioned, it can take weeks or days, you're actually kind of already missed the boat, I think. So actually, my summary for this is that I don't think really that moving from a manual system to a technology-based system is an option. The only real question for competitive reasons is that which one do you use? So there's some, and there's really 2 types, right? There's standalone traceability solutions, and then there's ERP systems, right? And the standalone sometimes can have other stuff built out. We do offer that, so that's in addition to the other stuff we do. And ERP systems is focused on the financial and inventory control side, and they have the traceability as well. But not everybody can handle every kind of eventuality. So one of the things to consider when you look at people who are saying that they offer a traceability system is, first of all, can you do a mass balance calculation? And what this means is, can you run a report that shows where every gram of product is that's the subject of the recall, both the initial ingredient, the finished product, and all the precursor ingredients in between if you have a more complicated production process. So this is a very important point. Another one is the technology and company fit. And to give you another example here, in Iowa, there's a place called Hilldale Farms, and they had a recall of eggs. and they had 500 million eggs recalled. And you can imagine how many companies were affected because they were using eggs in their product. I mean, this was a holocaust in terms of traceability. The interesting thing about Hilldale was that they had a traceability system in place. They were able to say, these are the particular lots coming from this facility on this date that are affected. And the range was actually fairly narrow. But the reason it was a problem for them was that those two levels of those two sort of data points, the facility and the date, wasn't enough because they had 53 million chickens that were laying eggs every day. So even if every chicken laid an egg, you have 53 million out before you even know what's happening. So they needed kind of barn resolution, not just date based. And if they had have had that, you would imagine that the recall would be a lot narrower. Now, of course, in many cases, it doesn't matter. As soon as you say have anything recalled, all your customers might ship the product back to you. But at least you have a reasonable chance of avoiding this kind of a problem. Another issue is the implementation cycle. How long does it take? If it's going to be 6 or 7 months to install it, probably not something you really want. Usability is a major issue. Does it fit with your business process? Can your workers actually adopt this technology? So many times people have, they have a software solution, they never even turn it on. And if that's the case, that organizational change is important. You need the executive commitment as well. You need to consider the long-term planning. There's a few things that aren't on that slide there. One is like the safety of the document storage. If you have it all in one spot, you lose that box of loose paper, you're toast. If it's on a server and you lose that hard drive, it's toast. So you need to make sure that you've got that record, and it depends a little bit on the kind of life expectancy. If you're producing pitas and your document your traceability sort of on shelf life of your product is only a week, it's not going to be as much of a problem as if you're producing flour and it's got a 5-year shelf life. So you got to consider those things as well. Another thing is paper versus electronic. And there's something else. People mix up the word digital and electronic a lot of times. So if it's a document management storage system where what you're doing is scanning your paper documents and you've got a digital version of that, who cares, right? That's not good enough. It's got to be integrated with all your other business systems in some sort of a database where you can run reports and look and slice and dice things kind of differently. And scan paper totally doesn't do that. So it's got to be, truly electronic in some kind of way. You have to look at your product lines, and I think a lot of times when you're looking at doing a traceability exercise or implementing traceability for the first time in your facility, it's important to think about your product lines. And one of the observations I've made dealing with companies all over the world is that the more mature the company, the narrower the product line tends to be. So you'll find huge companies that have 20 products, or they might buy different brands and each one has 20, but they're not going to have. We have chocolate manufacturers, for example, who have over 2,000 with products with a facility that's 5,000 square feet and 8 people. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all. So narrowing down your product lines, thinking about kind of standardizing your products, not making so many one-offs, not making so many custom products, really simplifies your traceability exercise to kind of a great extent. And then the other question is, really fully integrated with all of your other systems? Because if it's standing alone, it means you're going to be doing duplicate data entry, and that is a killer in terms of getting your workforce to adopt that technology. So traceability is also a chain. There's an interesting disconnect, I think, right now between the objectives of the regulatory authorities, who would really like to see a traceability overview that's really completely across the industry, and what your actual requirements are from a regulatory perspective. And Steve touched on this as well, where he was saying it's one step forward and one step back. And I would recommend kind of really thinking about that. But traceability, in order to have that kind of higher level oversight, you need everybody in the supply chain, moving in kind of the same direction. And I think there's still a lot of big gaps there. Like we have clients who buy from producers who don't have a computer. Maybe their barn where they're raising their chickens don't even have electricity. I mean, there's no way that these guys are going to be of moving into technology anytime soon. And as soon as you have a hole, you've broken the chain. So traceability absolutely is a chain. I'm not really sure that it's going to be a blockchain, however, and I'll talk at the end of it a little bit about what I think kind of about blockchain. It's also not a sales pitch for Icicle here, but I've just put out these 11 items that are the primary functions of the application. And the interesting point that I wanted to make by showing that slide is that 8 out of those 11 functional areas play into traceability. So traceability is not a standalone feature. It has to be fully integrated with all the other business processes to really work effectively. Here's a scary slide of the homepage of our application that's sort of looking at the same situation from a different way. There's actually, I'll save you from counting them, there's 44 modules that address different functional areas, different aspects of the application. And if I counted those up, 25 of those play into the traceability system. So it really is in a very, and what our goal here to do is essentially everything that an ERP system doesn't do. Some overlap because not everybody has an ERP, but that's the idea. And more than half of those functions are required for traceability. So if you do everything right, and you have all your records, you're doing your receiving, you're doing your production runs, you're doing your shipping records, you're tracking the inventory movement through your facility, and you've got all the data at your fingertips, you should be able to press one button and get this kind of a report. And then when you've reached that, you know that you've kind of reached a level that's you're at the finish line in terms of where you need to be for traceability. So what this shows is that based on the recall of a organic coconut oil, the system detects the fact that you've got finished product with that in there. And there's some nuances there too, because a lot of companies have, there's a wide diversity in the food industry. Many companies produce different products in ways that were very surprising to me when I first got into it. So like a very common scenario, for example, is departs from the standard, which is usually that you buy ingredients, you make product, right? You ship out finished products from the ingredients that you make. But there's a lot of companies that actually do it the other way around. They get an incoming ingredient like milk, and they split it into multiple products: skim milk, 2% milk, cream, right? Make butter out of it as well. So here you have a decomposition. So you got to make sure your traceability can support that, and then also the mass balance calculations can handle the notion of that decomposition of products. Another one is those precursor products. So we have clients and many food companies have a more complicated manufacturing process where it's not just one step, ingredients to finished products. There's multiple products. You have bakers, they'll make a starter. They make the starter into dough. They take the dough and make it into 5 different products that add different toppings on them, and they have a whole bunch of SKUs that result from the same initial product line. And the complexity there can be quite high at many times. So you got to make sure that the system that you have can support that as well. Then there's ways that you need to make sure that you can kind of make the whole process as easy as possible for you as a company. And one of the ways that we really do that, we focus on is the notion of product inheritance. So can your system have, what product inheritance is? I like to use the example popsicles because it's really simple. You've got popsicles, they got a stick, they got water, they got sugar, they're in a package, and you make different flavors though. So you're gonna have cherry, you're gonna have grape, you're gonna have lime, all these different types. But the fundamental process underneath and the basic ingredients are common. So do you have a way to kind of model, and I'm a big fan of kind of modeling businesses, because I find that if you can have an accurate model of the business, it fits very well with the workflow. And if it fits with the workflow, it lends to usability, which in turn encourages adoption, which means that your projects are successful, right? So it's really important. So, does your traceability solution have the ability to utilize that product inheritance advantage? And then the other thing is, what about the kind of integrity of your data? So I'm a software guy, so I look at data. And when I was originally looking at building a traceability system, I was asking myself, how do I know that I'm not going to leak product, right? What happens if I have a bug in my software And that results in incorrect results being returned. And there's going to be no way to recover from it, right? So I took a page out of the accounting playbook and built it on a double entry accounting engine so that every transaction has two sides and it always has to balance to zero. And using that kind of a system, you could be sure that that's not going to, you're not going to have a problem of leaking product. So my last slide here, future of blockchain. So, or is the future of blockchain. So there's another speaker, and I'm very interested to hear that talk as well. So but I personally have really 4 concerns with blockchain that I'm not, and I think 2 are technical and 2 are non-technical. And I'm not sure how they're going to be overcome, and I'm very interested to hear that. So the first one is the issue of privacy. So the idea behind blockchain, distributed ledger, different people have access to different transactions. And you guys as food manufacturers, your most important asset is really the secrecy of your recipes. And to have all of your recipe information in a blockchain that's publicly available, obviously, is something that you wouldn't want it to happen. And and of course that doesn't have to happen under blockchain, but the level of security is evolving, but not quite there yet. I think where we can say, okay, today we're ready to move the whole thing over to blockchain. I hope I'm wrong about that, and I'm interested to hear what the other speakers could have to say. The other one is a more challenging issue, which is the computational intensity that's required and the energy consumption. I spent 4 years working developing software for BC Hydro on energy conservation and energy generation. Right now, we have already blockchain systems are consuming as much power as the country of Haiti. 140 countries in the world use less power than blockchain. And if we have every possible product that's produced recorded in a blockchain, which would be ideal from a regulatory perspective, I don't know how we're going to power that. But there are some things that are coming up. I know the issue about the consensus algorithms versus authority. There might be ways to overcome that problem too. But adoption is a big issue. I mean, a lot of companies are just having problems getting off paper and into Excel. I mean, how are you going to get all these guys onto blockchain? And you need a complete chain in order to really make the thing work. That's one thing. And then the last one is kind of regulatory versus industry objectives. And in China, for example, I hosted 50 Chinese food safety people from the government who came over. They're uniquely identifying every product in the country with tamper-proof labels, and they have a central database to scan that. And you look at the number, we're talking about trillions of items just in China alone that's produced every year. How are we going to scale that kind of volume? I'm not really sure. So thank you, and I ran a couple of minutes over, hopefully not too much.